everybody, Mark Bates here, and today I want to talk to you about Buffalo plugins. In this video, we're just going to really talk about how they kind of work in relation to your app and just using them. In another video, we'll talk about how to write Buffalo plugins. Now, before you can use plugins, you need the Buffalo plugins plugin. I know, very meta, isn't it? We can do a go get on it, and the current version of Buffalo plugins as of this video is 1.14.0, I believe. So that's what we're going to be using here. So if you see any of the commands I'm using not show up on your installation, please go ahead and update your installation of the Buffalo plugins plugin. Now what this does is this is going to give us a bunch of kind of tools for working with Buffalo plugins. And it also comes with its own plugin manager. So let's talk about what this all looks like. So here is a brand new Coke app, nothing fancy here. I literally just did Buffalo new Coke. This is kind of the hello world of Buffalo. Inside of this app, this newly generated app, we now have a config directory. And inside the config directory is a Buffalo plugins toml file. And when this file is here, it's going to activate the Buffalo plugins plugin manager. And so what does the plugin manager do? Well, as you can see in this toml file here, it lists the plugins that this application needs. Now, because this is a Buffalo New Coke, it's going to use Pop, so we also need the Buffalo Pop plugin as well as the Buffalo Plugins plugin. And this is a file you can use to manage those plugins. And we can ask Buffalo Plugins for a list of what it believes to be the plugins this application can see. And what it's going to do is going to look through that toml file, figure out what's there, and then present that information to us. So as you can see here, I've got two plugins, as we saw just a second ago, Buffalo Pop and Buffalo Plugins. And it kind of lists the commands and a description of what they do. Now, if I were to move that file here to, let's just call it config Buffalo Plugins .bak here, backup. I apparently have the move tool in there twice, my bad. I'm just gonna, there we go. And I run the Buffalo plugins list command again. I'm gonna get a different result. And you can see now I have other plugins. I have Buffalo Auth, Buffalo Docker, Buffalo Heroku. And that's because we're no longer using the plugin manager. So when you remove that toml file from your config directory, Buffalo is no longer using the plugin manager. Instead, it has to start searching your entire system to try to find what plugins are available. So the plugin manager allows us to scope the amount of plugins we have for an application. It also speeds up the process because it doesn't have to go and kind of search your entire system. It also makes it easier for those using your application to install the plugins you need. So here I'm going to set my application back to its initial state, and I'm going to remove the Buffalo Pop plugin. And you can see if I remove it, it's not there. So what I can do now is I can say Buffalo Plugins install, and that's going to look at the plugins my app needs from that toml file, and it's going to actually install them in my system. So now I can say which Buffalo Pop, and it should work again. If I want to add a new plugin to my application, I can say Buffalo Plugins add, and then I can give it some tags maybe, and then the plugin I want to install. So I'm going to install Buffalo Heroku into my app with a tag of foobar. And if I were to refresh my toml file, you can now see that my plugins as Heroku installed, as well as the tags. So I can actually say Buffalo Plugins list, and we should see all of the plugins, including Heroku and Auth there as well. And if I were to do Buffalo Plugins install -v, and the V is obviously for verbose. And if I run this now, what's going to happen is it's going to go through and look through all the ones in our toml file. It's going to go and try to install them. And you can see with the Buffalo Heroku one, it even added the foobar tags to the go get statement for me. So this is really useful for other members of your team. They can just come in, do Buffalo Plugins install, and it's going to install the plugins necessary for them. We can also do Buffalo Plugins remove, and then give it the plugin we want to remove. In this case, I want to remove the Heroku plugin, and that's just going to update our toml file here accordingly. So it's more of a convenience helper than something that's actually pretty useful, but in the future it might have other things it does. For example, maybe it removes the binaries for you. Now, in the past, there have been some performance issues with Buffalo plugins, trying to scan, obviously, your app looking for Buffalo plugins. This was before the plugin manager, but even with the plugin manager, it needed to ask each of your plugins a little bit about itself. What commands it has, what things it can listen to, events and such like that. And that could take some time. So in an earlier release of Buffalo plugins, I believe 1.12 or 1.13, I can't quite remember when, we added a cache. And this cache significantly speeds up the lookup time involved with plugins. So we can ask the Buffalo plugins cache to list what's in the cache. And you can see here, I got this big JSON file here, and it lists every plugin that this application can see. So you can see I've got, actually this is every application available to me generally. So for example, the Buffalo Heroku one, here's the path where the binary is, here's a checksum of the binary and the available commands that this binary has. Here is the Buffalo plugins one, again, the checksum, its location, and a list of commands. This one has 3 different commands that are available to Buffalo. The generate, one for root, and one for events. And the same thing with pop, and so on. And we can clear that cache as well. We can clean that cache, and that's going to empty out the cache. But if we call it again, it's just going to actually rebuild the cache for me. And Buffalo plugins will automatically rebuild these caches for you. And it'll also update these checksums as the plugins change. So if you install a new version of Buffalo Pop, for example, this checksum will change. It'll invalidate the entry in the cache, and the cache will update. So you can see here I cleared out my cache and it actually removed a bunch of other plugins, and those are the ones that were on my system but not part of this app here. Now, if you ever think your cache has gotten into a weird state or you're seeing some weird issues with Buffalo plugins, I would recommend running Buffalo plugins cache build, and this will clear your cache and then rebuild it to make sure that it's fully up to date with what's on our system at the moment. And you can see we're back to our nice cache again. Now, should you not want to use the plugin manager, which I recommend you use, but if you don't, there are alternatives to it. If you remove that file, like I said, it's going to try to find plugins on your system in kind of just a lazy way. And it does that by looking in 2 different places. The first is the environment variable Buffalo plugin path. And this is where you can assign an environment variable that tells it where to look for plugins on your system. Now, by default, this looks in your path variable. So this looks for any place basically that you have in your path that might have bins. And what it looks for then is anything that's named Buffalo Dash. And if it's named Buffalo Dash, so Buffalo Dash Heroku, Buffalo Dash Pop, whatever, it's going to then try to ask that a few questions. And the questions it asks it are, first of all, are you executable? And second of all, do you respond to an available subcommand that tells me what plugins, what commands are available? But we'll cover most of that in another video when we talk about how to write them. There's also the Buffalo plugin timeout, and that tells it how long it's going to wait to respond to hear back from a plugin about information. And by default, that is 1 second. And that uses the time duration format, so keep that in mind when you're using it. Now, again, I do not recommend not using the plugin manager. In fact, there's a proposal on the table to remove the system-wide search, so this Buffalo plugin path, for example, to make that go away and to enforce the use of the plugin manager. So that's definitely something you want to keep in mind as you're moving forward with your applications. Now, we also don't have to have all of our plugins in our path somewhere, nor do they also have to be Go. And we'll talk about not writing non-Go plugins in another video. But in my Coke app here, I have a plugins folder, and inside of that, I have buffalo-hello.rb. And this is a Ruby file, and this is an example of a plugin that is written in Ruby. So the Buffalo package manager plugin manager rather, not only looks for the plugins on your system to try and find those, but it'll also look in the subfolder plugins inside your application. And if it finds a folder called plugins, it's then going to start looking at the executable files in there. And again, looking for that Buffalo dash and asking if it's an executable and what available commands it has. So here I've got, like I said, a very simple Ruby one, and all it really does is it has a hello command that says hello to you, and it just prints hi there to the screen. But if I were to ask my Buffalo plugins to list themselves out, it's also going to look in my plugins directory, and you can see buffalo-hello.rb as something I can call. So I can say buffalo hello, and that's actually going to call out to that Ruby file that's in the plugins directory inside of my Coke app. So before we go, I do want to show you how you can find new plugins, and that's with the Buffalo Toolkit. And this is toolkit.gobuffalo.io. And this site lets you kind of search around and try to find different tools, for example, middleware, plugins, that sort of thing. So we're looking at our plugins here, and there appear to be 12 of them. And it's fairly easy to get your plugins into this list. You just have to tag your GitHub plugin repo with Go Buffalo, as well as plugin, and it's going to show up here. This is a great place to try and look and see what Buffalo plugins are already out there. So for example, Buffalo Azure, the Azure team has this great Buffalo plugin that they're working on. And you can kind of read a bit more about it, where the repository is, how many forks, watchers, that sort of stuff, the README, and so on. And you can also search the toolkit. So when you're writing your plugins, please make sure to add them there, and obviously go there to try and find your plugins. Anyway, that is it for this look at how we manage our plugins in our Buffalo application, as I hope this helps. This video was brought to you by Gopher Guides. If you are an organization, conference, or user group looking for Go training, please visit gopherguides.com. For more great videos like this one, please visit gopherguides.tv.